Talking Memphis Wrestling with Randy Hales, featuring Michael St. John, Pat Trammell, and special guests.
Hello, everybody. It's Randy Hales. Welcome to Talking Memphis Wrestling. Welcome to this day on November the 15th, 2022. And it has turned cold. It really has. Yesterday morning, I had to scrape ice off my windows. Saturday morning, I had to drive in the snow a little bit. The time has arrived for cold weather to be here. Again, it's 42 degrees in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where my story begins. And we will talk a little bit about Jonesboro, Arkansas, just because I will tell you I am in Master Control D. Adam Dunn might not even consider it Master Control at all. This is the home studio. This is the main studio. This is where the show is created, and we welcome you to the show. Now, I don't know who in the world or when in the world my guest will show up. I do have a guest I'll bring on in just a few minutes. I know Michael St. John will be here tonight, and I'm excited to death about that for sure. Michael St. John said he is home. He was on a trip. He is home, but he is not in the backup room, the backstage room right now at all, but we will see him. And the person that I didn't know about, because he's up to some foolishness, Panetta's in the house, and that's the first guest, the first person in the room. Hello to the First Lady. And now, I want to say hello to one of the founding members of Talking Memphis Wrestling. He wasn't here last week, I do not think, but he is here this week, even though he didn't really know if he was going to make it or not. So tell everybody, Pat, what's going on with you?
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Needy, good to see you. I had been in Kennesaw, Georgia, and came back tonight and went and kept a book for the Altamont Knights basketball game, and I'm back live. Good to be with everybody.
I guarantee you, can everybody hear you? I guarantee you, if we can't hear you, they'll tell you in a heartbeat. Adam will tell you, we'll tell you. So you don't even have to ask that question, because before you can even think about it, we will correct you. My buddy from Georgia, from the Peachtree state of Georgia, it doesn't hurt his feelings at all to know that he's my second favorite person from Georgia, Al Tuttle in the house. And obviously, Pat, our producer and our backup guy to save me if I lose control of this show, and with people like Pat Trammell as a co-host and a guest and a panel member, I might lose control. The person always available to save me and calm me down. What's going on with Adam besides you have sickness in your family?
Yeah, got a kid that's down ill with things going around right. So it wasn't too far away from me. Kennesaw, maybe about an hour. That so Pat was close by. Now, of course, he's back in Alabama. And yeah, here coming. So we've got Alabama, Georgia, all on the screen right here.
Now, if it all works out, we will have two Alabama guys, Pat Trammell, and we will have Michael St. John. We'll have two Georgia guys, one on screen, Adam Dunn and Al Tuttle, and then we'll have two Arkansas guys. If it's a big if, because he's at a basketball game. There were a few minutes ago, they were 10 points ahead with 10 minutes to go in the game. Chris Ellis should be here as well. Frank Seaton is another Arkansas guy in the house watching. So before we do anything else, because Pat, I know you weren't here last week. I don't remember 2 weeks ago. We hadn't heard from you. You updated us on what you were doing today, but what's going on in your life?
Well, just busy at work, busy chasing kids down and making sure they're okay. And so just it's been a busy couple of weeks, but I'm glad to be here with our friends. Princess says hello from the backstage of the home studio at 1807 Seneca Road, Vestavia Hills, Alabama.
Well, that's one thing. You're more interesting of some of our listeners and viewers than I am, because I certainly would not, but I probably have more enemies in the world than you do anyway. And I want to say hello, Jim Early, another Arkansas guy in the house, and that is good as well. To preview the show today, we'll talk about a lot of different things, including we will do a feature on second generation Memphis wrestlers. That's later in the show. We will also, last week we talked about some of the most controversial things that happened in professional wrestling. Tonight, we will talk about some of the saddest thing that happened, not only in Memphis wrestling, but in professional wrestling in general. So we will do that today, a big deal that we will certainly get to with the feature today on the program. Tony is in the house and appreciate it very much. And I want, first thing to start off with, Pat, that I want to do is certainly again announce the newest member of the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame. And this was out of my control. It's somebody that's as worthy or more worthy, without a shadow of a doubt, no doubt, than anybody, my mentor, because without Eddie Marlin, they would not ever be a Randy Hales. And there's absolutely, positively 110% no doubt about that. Wish it would have been done while he was still alive. Wish it would have been done at a live event, but at times the Hall of Fame, unfortunately, is out of my hands. But this guy, I'm not going to gripe about. I'm not going to bitch about. The newest member of the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame, without a doubt, is Eddie Marlin. Welcome to the Hall of Fame. I love me some Eddie Marlin. Born August of 1930, passed away in August of 2019, one day after his 89th birthday. Well-deserved Hall of Fame, and that is, of course, the great Eddie Marlin. So, Pat Trammell, I'm sure, and I'll bring you back on real quick before we bring our next guest in, I'm sure you agree with the Eddie Marlin announcement.
I absolutely agree with our Eddie Martin announcement, and I know how close Eddie was to you. But there wouldn't be a Memphis Wrestling without Eddie Marlin, and it's a I know you think about him every day, and I think about him a lot too, and just a you know obviously if Eddie Marlin's not in the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame, there shouldn't be a Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame. So I'm excited that Eddie's inducted finally with all his friends and heroes.
I just wanted to do it. I had plans to do it. I wanted to do it in a big way. We can still do it in a big way. I wanted to do it at a live event. I wanted, just like I want to do Michael, I want to do it at a live event. I want to put, as far as Eddie, I wanted to present the plaques to Randy West and Diane West, Eddie's daughter Diane, son-in-law Randy. I wanted to present a plaque to Jerry Jarrett, the son-in-law from the other side, and Deborah, his oldest daughter. You have plans, but there's been a hostile takeover of people still choosing sides. That's just the way it is. But to talk about Eddie Marlin, to talk about what in the world he's doing, I know what he was doing last Tuesday night. He was reporting election results. We still don't know if Herschel Walker will when the runoff, it was Broadway. They went Broadway. Michael St. John was very busy last Tuesday, so I'm hoping this will be a lot less pressure and a lot less work than you were in the middle of. Welcome back to the show for the first time in several weeks, Michael St. John.
Thank you, Randy. First of all, Broadway, what a great term for the Georgia election. That's great. But yeah, I'm really glad to be back because the pressure's off, and the pressure's off for making sure you got it right. Actually, we reported live. There's a new venue at Gunnersville called City Harbor that was developed by a developer out of the Dallas area who used to watch championship wrestling on Channel 11 in Dallas and was well versed in the matches at the Sportatorium. And when Jerry Jarrett bought that, and anyway, I've gotten to know him. But I was a guest of our Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth as we reported live from his winner's celebration at the harbor. And that was a really nice scene. And of course, the weather was good. The weather's gotten really bad, of course, since then, cold wise. But I was honored to do that with the lieutenant governor of our state, and who won re-election, of course. And, you know, around here, there wasn't a lot of surprises, but nationwide, there were a lot of surprises. And speaking of surprises, Randy, did you see the surprise before the Memphis game? I want to say with SMU or Tulsa on Saturday, there was a big wrestling event in front of the stadium out by the Mid-South Coliseum in which Jerry Lawler and Doug Gilbert and a lot of stars participated. And I understand Dave Brown was the MC of the entire event.
Can you believe I was not caught about that? I wasn't booked on that. So, yeah, I was aware of it in advance. And my friend Dave and my friend Jerry Lawler, my friend Doug Gilbert, and also Lex Luger was in, Scott Steiner was in, Ricky Steamboat was in. It was wrestling night, and that's a great thing as they still, even though there might be so-called wrestling programs on the air, people, the masses still think of Memphis Wrestling as CWA, as USWA, and a Power Pro Wrestling, and that will never, ever change. Michael, we have Tanner saying hello to you, Panetta saying hello to you, Frank saying hello to you, Al Tuttle saying hello to you. How long have you been gone? They're acting like you've come back from the dead. It hadn't been that long, has it?
It's only been 2 weeks. According to my calendar, it's only 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we had the start of the playoffs, and I was out of the area interviewing coaches like I was today. But today, differently, I left early. As soon as I got off the air this morning at 9:00, I jumped in the car and went to Pleasant Grove down in your neck of the woods, Pat. And from there to Tuscaloosa Academy, and from there back home, and stopped at Dreamland Barbecue because Melanie wanted some ribs from the original down on Jug Factory Road in Tuscaloosa. So I brought back a slab of ribs with some fixins, and that's what we had for dinner. And she was happy, and I'm happy. And are you wearing a Vanderbilt shirt, Pat?
I am wearing a Vanderbilt shirt in your honor.
I knew it. And I'm wearing my Alabama shirt in honor of all the people that are in mourning right now.
Well, that's right. That's right.
But Randy, I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I want to always do my best to be here. But I apologize. Just the other 2 weeks, unfortunately, business sort of took over this time slot. But I'm back, and looking forward to next week talking turkey with you.
Well, right now I want to talk not turkey, and I want Adam to put the graphic back up there. I've already said my piece, and Pat said his piece, and we want to talk about the newest member of the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame, Eddie Marlin, born August 1930, passed away August 2019. Michael just got lucky, was in the Nashville area, so I saw Michael for the first time in a long time. I didn't know who the hell he was, didn't have a clue. Jeff Jarrett yelling for me and coming over and said, "Who's this, Randy?" And I did not have a clue, but certainly Eddie Marlin being in the Hall of Fame, certainly well-deserved. It could be called the Eddie Marlin Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame, if you ask me. But, Michael, just we've talked about it 1,000 times, but this is one more chance before we get to what's on this paper today, one more chance to say a few words about Eddie Marlin. Here's Michael St. John.
Well, first of all, long overdue. And I understand your reasoning, and I love your reasoning for it, because an event that would bring him into the Hall, I think, is totally proper and a great honor. You couldn't have picked a better. There's nothing more that says Memphis wrestling than Eddie Marlin. And I think a lot of people that watch the shows and see Eddie in front of the camera maybe don't get a real picture of what Eddie did for the Memphis wrestling territory and for the boys and for the business that he really contributed. And besides the family affair with, of course, Jerry's wife and Randy West, our good friend, and his loving wife, Eddie was just an integral part of the wrestling community, but more so an integral part of Memphis wrestling as an event and as a business. And the thing that always, when I first got to meet and work with Eddie, the thing that always amazed me about him is how attuned and acute he was to this business, and how he was, I don't want to say married, because I certainly don't want to take anything away from his wife, but he was married
Norma
to this
Marlin.
business.
Let's plug Norma.
Absolutely. A wonderful woman, by the way. Behind every good woman or good man is a good woman, and I'm lucky to have one as well. But Norma was a wonderful wife. But Eddie, I think, and to be honest with you, Randy, I think you'd probably agree with this. Eddie probably did more behind the camera than in front of the camera that really led to the success and the longevity of the Memphis wrestling family, if you would. And there was none better. I mean, working with him and having an honor to ride the roads with him and talk to him about other things other than wrestling. This was a very, very bright man, a very smart man. And I can't, you know how I feel, Randy and Pat, I've talked about it long enough on this show. To me, there's none better. There's none better. And Randy, I think this is a home run 10 times over.
Now, coming up on this show today, talking Memphis wrestling, we're kind of taking it down a little bit. We'll talk about some of the saddest moments, not only Memphis wrestling, but in professional wrestling. That's coming up a little later on in the program. And we're also going to have a good little segment as we talk about the second generation wrestlers of Memphis wrestling. And certainly we have congratulations from Tanner. And also we have Jim Early with words on Eddie Marlin. But right now, and we'll start with you, Pat, in the kind of last minute. As a matter of fact, I went down to the wire. Al sent me the YouTube clip of the latest. I plugged last week on the show that it was going to be Portland wrestling. It wasn't Portland wrestling. That's supposed to be tonight. It was Polynesian wrestling, pro wrestling in Hawaii, and that was the last edition. And I sent out the YouTube link to you and Michael and to Chris and to Adam last minute. So apparently Michael had already watched the thing. But Pat, did you have a chance to watch that?
The Polynesian, yeah, I did.
What were your thoughts?
It's extremely interesting. I mean, it's something that, to be honest with you, I knew it existed, but I knew absolutely nothing about it, other than I did know that Dwayne Johnson's family's, I think his mother's family, were multi-generation promoters of that. And that really, I think, is his roots in the business. But it was, it was extremely interesting. I've got I've always had a notion that a place that is isolated is a perfect place for wrestling, and Polynesia is, those islands and the chains, and I think they ran a good bit of stuff in Hawaii, but very interesting in a different kind of way.
I was most interested in the fact, one of a lot of things that I was happy with is that, I'm pretty educated on the territories, Polynesian wrestling. As I look at my notes, Adam, if we can put the Tales from the Territory graphic back up there, as that I can give some information. It first came to a thing with Peter Maivia being the owner of the company, and Peter Maivia, obviously the grandfather of Dwayne Johnson, the father-in-law of Rocky the Soul Man Johnson. And the cool thing about the Hawaiian Islands was that, as Pat said, it was separate from everybody, and they got a lot of great talent there because when wrestlers were booked in Japan, they had to stop in Hawaii to fuel up the plane, and they got a lot of great talent. And who wouldn't want to go to Hawaii? And they had all kinds of just absolutely fantastic. When Peter died of cancer in 1982, his wife Leah took charge, hired a booker. That booker was Lars Anderson. This show, the guest, the panel was downtown Bruno. Got one of his first breaks there. Lars Anderson, Kevin Sullivan, King Curtis Jr. Was there. So it was just a great deal, obviously produced by Dwayne Johnson's deal. Dwayne Johnson's certainly his production company, and he's going to cover territories that mean a lot for them. I just learned so much. The riot there between, as Kevin Sullivan was involved in, the havoc in Honolulu. It's fantastic story, just one story after another. They told a story of Kevin Sullivan screwed himself, was supposed to go over, and he thought he wouldn't live out the night if he won, so he went ahead and quickly lost the match. Their biggest, I'll say this first, they had an incident involving the FBI showing up. They also had a big stadium show that did 22,000 people, ended up with a hostile takeover attempt and a power struggle, and it was just absolutely. And Adam is telling me Jerry Lawler won the NWA Polynesian Pacific Heavyweight Championship while on a working vacation in Hawaii on January 25th, 1986. And that's good information from Adam. So I couldn't talk any more highly, because I learned stuff I didn't know. Thanks again to Al Tuttle for sending it to me. And I don't know how much Michael knew about this promotion. And he's fixing to tell us his thoughts on this show that continues, apparently, with Portland Wrestling tonight. Michael, what you think about the show that you watch on Polynesian Pro Wrestling?
You know, to be honest with you, I was like you. I learned a lot. I knew a little bit about it. Of course, we're talking about Rocky Johnson's grandfather and grandmother. And after his granddad died, his grandmother took over, and she had a good booker in Lars Anderson who understood the Polynesian culture. And it is a different culture of the way those people live their lives. And I think that being that he understood the culture helped understanding. The big deal is the Polynesians, they were all big and forceful wrestlers, but they really enjoyed when the folks from the States would come over, and it made for great booking. I mean, like you said, it's easy booking when they're already on their way to Japan or doing a stopover, or like in Jerry Lawler's case, spending a working vacation there. So I did learn quite a bit, but I also knew quite a bit. I was amazed, and the part I did not know that surprised me the most is that Peter Maivia's wife, Rocky's grandmother, was deported after the incident with the FBI, and it was found that there had not been taxes filed for decades, and literally lost the business because of a tax situation. And I don't know who her accountant was, but I'm sure he got fired. But
she probably didn't have one. That was the problem.
Probably right. But I did learn a lot. I think it's different from I think it's different from all the other territories because of its isolation, because of the nature of the territory. But I also saw online that took more heat. It seemed to me on Twitter, it took more heat than any of the other episodes about what am I saying here? Abnormalities and product that was sold or died, things we were told that weren't quite 100% the truth. And so you probably have to look at what was and what wasn't. But it looked like to me, or it seemed to me on social media, that it took more heat than the other episodes.
I haven't read that. So what are they saying that was wrong, and who are they saying that embellished? We know the Memphis episode got a lot of heat with Jerry Jarrett talking about the eyeball rolling around the floor. That got heat. There was some stuff on the Florida episode they're wrestlers, by God. I embellish some stories from time to time. I'm a wrestling guy. Greg Gagne from the AWA. But can you be more specific in what the heat is?
Two of the things was, number one was the pay-per-view show at Hawaii at Honolulu Stadium between the first show and the second show, and some of the boys that supposedly were all happy and thrilled and got a great payoff and all this, and some of that apparently was clouded and was not absolutely positively the truth. And the other part came about was the FBI investigation, that it was embellished, that the FBI did get called, but it did not end up being a full-blown investigation of a supposed murder plot or whatever that was, and that there was a little creative mutiny there, if you would, on that. But I'm like you, Randy. I think if you're a good booker, you're going to embellish. That's what helps make the booking.
Well, are they saying, was Leah Mavia, was she really deported, or was that just part of
No,
the
she
BS?
was deported, and she was deported not because of anything that happened with the FBI, which the show sort of gave the impression that the FBI investigation ended up opening a can of worms and with the tax situation, and then Leah got deported. But that wasn't the case. And so the FBI thing apparently was they showed up, asked a few questions, and it went away. And then a few years later, the tax issue came up in a completely different environment. But those were two of the things that I read about on Twitter that apparently people were questioning.
Now, let me ask you this. You've been around a long, long time as well, and it's very unusual. I mean, honestly, it didn't happen as many times as people would think that it did, but people changing finishes really didn't happen, because that would get you fired or worse, or get you in a fight, or it just didn't really happen. But it did happen from time to time. But the fact that Kevin Sullivan went out there and had to fight himself to the ring, and he was talking about coconut heads, and I'm quoting here, and making fun of that culture. He was being a heel, and he was told to go out and knock them, and then he sensed that heat, and they wanted him to go over in that match and switch the title to him, but he changed the finish and dropped the match in about 20 seconds, it sounded like to me. So he went the opposite way. He was supposed to go over. He changed it to where he put his opponent over, switched the script, because he didn't think he would survive it. So have you ever heard of it happening that way?
No, that's the first time I've heard of it that way. And also, he was supposed to go over on one of the big Samoans, and the crowd was all Samoan. And apparently, Samoans, there is a concoction that the Samoans will drink when they are, and apparently has hallucinatory effects, a la LSD, that I did know about, because one of my son's best friends in college was from Samoa and was Polynesian, Le Malea Tulua. And I had heard about, never tried the drink or whatever, but I knew it was part of their culture. And apparently they were all stoned up on that night. And Kevin Sullivan, I think at that time, was also on his way out of the territory. Right. And they were going to put the belt on him to keep him. And so he like you said, he reversed. It was I think they called it the Honolulu screw job, or no, they called it the Sullivan screw job, where he literally screwed his own self out of the Polynesian belt.
Tanner, I did mention that the episode tonight is Portland. The episode next week is on world class wrestling. And boy, there's a lot of stories from world class. So I'm sure because you went to Dallas and was a part of the USWA once Jerry Jarrett took over and a surefire way to save that company. And they got it going, and all you guys did a great job. That really has nothing to do with this story, but the whole history of world-class wrestling. I'm looking forward to next week's show for sure.
Well, I think this Portland show is going to be interesting because I think Portland's a territory that's akin to Memphis that we haven't heard a lot of on this side of the Mississippi. But you talk about some of the great stars that came out of Portland wrestling, Playboy Buddy Rose, Roddy Piper.
Buddy Rogers, Jesse Ventura.
Exactly. There was a lot of stars in that territory. And again, Portland in Oregon. I don't know if you've ever been to Oregon. Back in the 90s, I consulted a station in Eugene called KDUK, KDUK, and had been to Oregon. And Oregon is a free spirit sort of state, akin to the east side of Colorado or the eastern side of the Rockies in Colorado. There's a lot of liberal thinking. There's a lot of activities in the street nightlife activities, if you would. And Portland was sort of a microcosm of itself with its wrestling company, sort of kind of like the Memphis territory was. I mean, let's be honest, the Memphis territory was a greatly kept secret until after the Memphis territory went away. I mean, the Memphis territory did not get the coverage in the national press for wrestling or all of that. I would say the one thing that turned people's attention to what was happening with Memphis wrestling was the Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman thing.
Yes, 1982. And, one thing that I kind of disagree with you because I think that up until about 1975, when Lawler had that single push and was doing record business in 74, Lawler became friends with Bill Apter. Here's advice, Pat. If you're a wrestler back in those days, make friends with Bill Apter. That was a key because he would put you on the magazines. And Lawler was the first, as far as I remember, Michael, was the first, and it happened probably in 75, was the first Memphis wrestler that was regularly in the so-called Bill Apter magazines, The Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Just a very, very interesting thing. And I just think Portland, there's just never been much out there. Chris Ellis was saying on last week's show, he's watched some of the stuff on YouTube. I have not. So I don't know, but he wasn't impressed with the television at all. I do know that Don Owens was the promoter, and certainly we'll see about that today. I do know he converted a bowling alley into the wrestling arena, and he had his live events and his TV. It sounded like a smart deal, and I understand, unlike Nick Goulas, and a little bit, Jerry Jarrett certainly had a better reputation than Nick Goulas with payoffs. But he didn't have a great reputation with payoffs. Don Owens had a great reputation for sure. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to try to, unless we need to move this show along.
Well, real quickly, didn't Dutch Mantell work in Portland also at one time?
Not that I know of. One of the partners, here's where you're kind of right. One of the stars there of the Oregon and Seattle and the whole thing there, and the booker was a guy named Dutch Savage.
Okay.
Now I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I wouldn't bet my life on it, but certainly I think that. And
the sheepherders I know or the bushwhackers. The sheepherders came out of there, and Frank Seaton just mentioned that Jonathan Boyd was a face in Portland wrestling, but they were sort of the wild childs, if you would, of that territory with a lot of blood and guts and barbed wire and all that kind of stuff. They were sort of the ECW of Portland wrestling, even before ECW went out there and did some things.
Very interesting, everybody. We'll try to be off the air 9 o'clock Central Standard Time. It comes on. We'll try to get out of here about 5 till so everybody can set their stuff. I don't have a DVR. I just have to watch it on my Fire Stick. Now, Al Tuttle says after put an article about the midget that beat. Yeah, after didn't do Lawler any good at that point. There's no doubt about that. All right, it is the November 15th edition. It's 42 degrees in Jonesboro, and just real quick, a one-word answer or two-number answer, whatever, in the Georgia area. Adam Dunn, what is your temperature? How's the weather? You hadn't made an appearance on here. We've been rambling on. We've been talking. I'm rambling on, introducing your ass right now because I'm giving you the chance to look the temperature up so you can tell us, welcome to the show, producer Adam Dunn. What's the weather like?
Well, if my computer's telling me the truth, it's 48 degrees currently in the Rome, Georgia area.
Real quick, your quick thoughts on Eddie Marlin to the Hall of Fame, because you and Kevin Lawler did that on me.
What? No, I mean, of course, my thought on Eddie certainly deserves it. Like Michael said, I mean, you really can't think of anyone much better to put into the Hall of Fame. And yeah, definitely, hopefully, if there's the next live event we have, we can do some more with it there. But yeah, I mean, there's not enough good words that can be said about Eddie and having him in the Hall of Fame.
So Robert Butler talking about Michael Butler in Humboldt, Tennessee, and I've been there many times. So all's well in the world, right, Adam?
Yes.
Except you have a sick kid.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, and we'll bring you back in because we have interesting subjects. And right now, we are going to talk about second generation wrestlers. And what I have in mind for this, guys, is that I tried to go in pretty good order of the career. I might have been out of whack. We will come back to both panel members with thoughts with each single guy. And then after we get finished with this, anybody that I might have left off, we'll go with that. The first one we'll talk about is Eddie Gilbert. He started his career in 1978. That's a great one of the first wrestling pictures of Eddie Gilbert. Eddie passed away in 1995, 33 years old. One of the favorites in the era of newsletters and dirt sheets and smart fans and the wrestling public changing and all that. One of the favorites was Eddie Gilbert, and certainly had a great wrestling mind and a great deal. Eddie Gilbert passed away too soon in 1995, and we'll go with Pat first. Quick thoughts on Eddie Gilbert.
You know, I think anytime anybody dies early, it's tragic. But you know, I remember Eddie a little bit, but you know, the longer I'm around and the more I, you know, are around smart people like you and Michael about, and I don't mean smart to be smart to the business. I mean people who have deep knowledge and a history of the business. Um, it seems to me that Eddie Gilbert had an unlimited future in the wrestling business as a performer, as a booker, as anything he wanted to be. And you know, it's just an absolute shame that he was taken from us so quickly.
No doubt about it. Your thoughts on Eddie Gilbert, Michael St. John, and how much were you around Eddie?
Well, quite a bit when he first started. I was doing play-by-play for Nick, and he worked that side of the territory as well. I thought he was probably one of the most, and I won't say self-trained, but self-inherited talents that I ever worked with. I mean, the guy was he was good at everything. He could sell, he could talk, he could bump, he was just good at everything. And you know, I was shocked when we lost him, and I know he got into some things that probably were not very good for him personally as well as career-wise. I have always wondered, and this is me talking out loud, and I'm not trying to open up a controversy here, but
Please
always
don't,
wondered.
because Doug wants to kill. I'm exaggerating, but Doug has major issues with Jim Cornette on something Jimmy said
Mine
about.
is
So be careful
no,
with
no.
what
I'm
you
I'm
say
not
here.
going to say anything. Nothing negative about Eddie.
Okay,
Nothing at all,
okay.
because there's nothing negative to say.
Oh, okay.
But I
Good.
will say
I
this.
feel that too. Yes.
I will say this. Uh, Eddie, I think Eddie fell head over heels in love with Missy Hyatt. And I think that was I think it started out as a work that ended up being a shoot. And when that all went away, I've always wondered, did Eddie ever get over his broken heart? That's all I want. And if that's controversial, it's controversial.
It's not. It's not.
That's what I've always wondered.
One thing I think, and I don't think it's controversial, but Eddie was young and he was in an underneath situation in the WWF. He had a car wreck, broke his neck. I don't think he was ever the same after that. Certainly. Here's another guy that is obviously controversial. I don't want to go that route either on this next guy, but we watched the Power Pro show that Buddy Wayne was on yesterday, and certainly one of Eddie Gilbert's earliest feuds, one of the earliest feuds of his career, was the Waynes against the Gilberts. There's Buddy Wayne, and there's Ken Wayne. Ken obviously came to fame as a part of the Nightmare tag team for many
with
years.
Danny Davis.
With Danny Davis, no doubt. Pat, I know you probably haven't watched a lot of Ken Wayne, but maybe you did, because he and Danny Davis had a long run in Continental there in Alabama. So I might have spoke too soon. You might be very familiar with the Nightmares. Pat, your thoughts?
I'm not unfamiliar, but yeah, I've watched a good bit of them, and when they were here as part of Continental, I think that is a highly underrated tag team. I
They
think
were
they
great.
could. I think they could. I think they could have gone to New York. I think they could have been WCW. I think they were just their work together was some of the best tag team wrestling of that era.
There's no doubt about it. Ken Wayne is still alive. He's 64 years old. So let's go back a long time ago. Let's go back to 1983. Let's get some inside scoops from Michael St. John, because when Bill Dundee lost the Loser League Town match in the best wrestling match I ever saw live, June 1983, to Jerry Lawler, they opened up a satellite promotion from Georgia Championship Wrestling, who had the promotional rights for Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it was decided that Bill Dundee would take a crew in there and would run that. The host of that program, and we've showed you stuff from there, was Michael St. John. Bill Dundee was the booker. It didn't last long, but Ken Wayne was there, and if memory serves me correct, because I have the man himself that was there in person that can verify or call me, tell me I was wrong, but I believe Ken Wayne was there in a mask gimmick called the Stray Cat. Right or wrong, in your memories of Ken Wayne?
100% right. And again, young guy. Pat made a great comment about them going into Southeastern. If I'm not mistaken, right after the Chattanooga thing, Bill Dundee was responsible for putting him and Danny Davis together as the Nightmares, and they were undersized from a height standpoint. But Bill loved the smaller wrestlers, the guys that could go and could work and could sell. And Ken Wayne was all about that. Second generation, his dad, I remember his dad on TV as I was growing up, working the territory. Buddy Wayne I don't think he was never on top, but he was always a mid-card attraction and could work, and was a good wrestler and had a lot of following, I know, in the Birmingham market back with Sterling Brewer, your commentator Sterling Brewer on Channel 42. And Ken Wayne was a later promoter and set up the rings and did a lot of behind the scenes things for Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler. But I do remember Ken Wayne when he broke in, and again, second generation, well taught, well respected parents. And I think as a part of the Nightmares, he and Danny Davis, I agree with Pat. They could have gone a lot further than they ended up going.
Now, one thing I'll say is that I think they would have drawn money in Watson's territory, drawn money in World Class, drawn money in WCW, might have drawn money in Mid-Atlantic and the Crockett territory. I don't foresee the WWF giving them a chance now at all. Nothing. Now, I was trying to think when you mentioned Bill Dundee putting them together, is that I believe it was in either 1980 or 1981 when they were put together as a team. The original Nightmares was Ted Allen and a Jonesboro guy who I graduated with, David Oswald. So Ted went away, got homesick pretty quickly. Then Jerry Jarrett brought in Danny Davis. Then David Oswald fell in love and he went away. And then they brought they put Ken Wayne with Danny. Now, Ken had already wrestled for, at that point, 4 years. Danny Davis 4 or 5. I don't think Dundee was the booker at the time, but he was probably having Jerry Jarrett. So he probably had a little bit to do with it, but basically Jerry Jarrett was, and it was just a natural. And they were the Grapplers, if you remember the Grapplers.
Right.
They were a great team as the Nightmares. They wrestled without the mask. They were just, when people say, like Pat did earlier, what was your word, Pat? Pat, underrated? Is that what you said?
Probably so, yes.
See, anytime people say that somebody is underrated, it's usually somebody that I feel is not underrated just because I think they're great and watch their career. So in my mind, they're not underrated because I always thought they were one of maybe the top 5 tag teams in the country. And I can tell you back in 1983, they were underneath tag teams, but as the Nightmares and then later as the Grapplers against the Rock and Roll Express, absolutely unbelievable matches that they had. Just absolutely unbelievable. Just great.
One of the little history on Danny Davis, if you would, Randy. Danny worked for Nick when I started with Nick in February of '79. Danny was there and was the manager of the Moondog, the guy that went on to become the Moondog. Danny, help me out here. Moondog
Larry
Spot.
Latham, Moondog
Larry
Spot.
Latham, and Wayne Ferris.
Now, Danny debuted in '78 and still wrestled underneath. When Robert Fuller was fired as the booker in '79 and Jerry Jarrett had to start over, they shot the angle. They just had to go with the talent they had because most of the talent left with Robert. So they just luckily had Lawler and Dundee as the Southern Tag Team Champions. They wanted to go the heat route. They shot the deal in Tupelo, Mississippi, the famous Tupelo concession stand brawl. They put Larry Latham and Wayne Ferris with Danny Davis as their partner, and they did the big brawl. And so Danny Davis was certainly the Tupelo concession stand brawl is one of the most famous moments ever, just absolutely the most famous moments ever. And then later on, Danny was a babyface manager to Jerry Lawler. Now, I'm kind of thinking that he might have been his manager during the Kaufman-Lawler deal, but I'm not 100% true on that. So, because we're trying to get out of here and we have a lot to do, trying to get out of here for the Tales from the Territory. We want to hit.
You overbooked the card tonight.
I can X-nay. I want to get through this. I want to get through this. Certainly, it's not like we don't have time. It's 7:49, so we have about an hour and 5 minutes. So I certainly will certainly talk about the second generation wrestler. Maybe just not be, maybe shorten up our replies, and want to talk about the guy that debuted. He come from wrestling royalty blood. He was certainly is currently 55 years old. He currently is the business affairs manager and a talent for AEW. It's J-E double F, J-A double R, E double T, Jeff Jarrett. You knew he was going to be a star from the get-go. He was athletic. He was born with it. The rest is history. Certainly Memphis or WWE Hall of Famer. He founded and ran TNA Wrestling. He owns that Gumma baseball team. He's into everything. There's no doubt about it. He's 55 years old. Quick thoughts, Pat, on Jeff Jarrett.
Enjoy Jeff and I are Twitter buddies, as I am with several of our friends on here, and you and Michael. And I enjoy what he posts. But the interesting thing about Jeff is we got to see career unfold on Memphis Wrestling from that just fantastic referee, and got jumped, and then they bring Lawler back, and and Eddie was involved in that, and in retrospect, there's no better family, there's no better way to tell the story of the Marlon Jarrett family than that angle.
No doubt about it. Quick thoughts on Double J, Michael.
Was there, had an honor of doing his first match on TV. And I'm like you, he was a great basketball player down at Goodpasture High School in Nashville. Played some football. You knew he was such a nice person. Just yes sir, no sir. I think I was 60 years old before he stopped saying no sir and yes sir to me. But I love Jeff Jarrett. I think he's smart. I think he got the best of both worlds. He got the best from his mom. He got the best from his dad. He's a star. He's in demand. Obviously, he was with WWE. Now he's at AEW. I hope AEW unties the handcuffs and lets him book and do what he's capable of doing, because I think that world would change and be much more successful. I will call him out on one thing though, Randy, and that is the guitar shot. The guitar shot was not originally a Jeff Jarrett gimmick. You remember who started that in Memphis Wrestling? No? Randy, are you there? I think Randy's camera has frozen. But anyway, it was Billy Travis. Billy Travis was the original guitar shot guy for Memphis Wrestling. And then, of course, Billy has left us, but Jeff took that to New York, and man, people just that was something they hadn't seen, and then when they did see it, boom, it was a big thing.
There's no doubt about it. Any final thoughts on Jeff?
I just think he's great. I'm sorry, he's the second generation of all the second generation wrestlers we will talk about tonight. I would probably have him number one of all the second generation wrestlers.
Well, I am in major conflict with that thought period. I don't know if I can have an answer, but we'll get into that later. The next person we want to talk about, I'm trying to go the time frame, the wrestling time frame, and around that territory. A third generation wrestler appeared. The grandfather was a wrestler, the father was a wrestler, the brother was a wrestler. We're talking about Dangerous Doug Gilbert of the famous Gilbert family. They are members of the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame. There's the picture of a young Doug, Eddie, and Tommy Gilbert. Pat, your thoughts real quick on Doug Gilbert.
I hadn't seen Doug wrestle as much as I have Eddie and Tommy, but third generation something special for sure.
Michael, quick thoughts.
Who was his grandfather? Buddy Fuller?
No. He was just wrestled in the independents. I think he never wrestled on television. He never wrestled on TV at all.
Gotcha. Um, Doug and Eddie. Doug was sort of the greenhorn of the family, if you would, when Eddie was around. And then after Eddie's passing, I thought Doug just became a tremendous on camera and on in-ring talent. And I've always enjoyed Doug's style, but I've also enjoyed Doug personally as a friend because he really took his brother's legacy, and I think maybe even made the Gilbert name shine even brighter by what he has done, and still to this day does in the ring. I think Doug Gilbert's an excellent talent.
Certainly, he's part of the old RH crew starting in 94 and 95, and I'm a Doug Gilbert guy, absolutely 100%. He and Tommy, PG-13, had just great events. Around the same era, about in 89, a guy that's a second-generation wrestler and the son of an absolute superstar. And we'll talk. We got two pictures about Jamie Dundee. Jamie Dundee currently is 51 years old. He's out there during that interview set, and you see how skinny he is. You see Jamie Dundee. He don't look like that now. That's a good picture of Bill and Jamie. And the other picture is that he was kind of managing another guy that kind of made a career for himself. And let's look at that picture. There he is with not Stone Cold Steve Austin, but with stunning Steve Austin. Jamie Dundee later, of course, part of the tag team PG-13. Michael, we'll just change it up a little bit and go as you probably live dang near right across the street in Hendersonville from the Dundees at one time. Your thoughts on Jamie Dundee?
I was over in Indian Lake, as you go into Indian Lake Forest and on Bonita Parkway, which was the same street that Jerry Jarrett's house was on, but I wasn't in that neighborhood. I was in the other neighborhood, if you would. And Bill and his wife and Jamie and his daughter lived one block over. And Jamie Dundee would come to our house and play with my son, Christopher. They play in the backyard. They play in the house. They would watch TV. I mean, they got to be buds. They didn't go to the same schools. I think Jamie at that time was at Indian Lake Elementary, and Chris and Jamie, my kids were at Sumner Academy. And but he was he grew up as a son of a wrestler. And I thought that Bill was a small of stature, and his wife wasn't very big either, stature wise. And I think Jamie, the growth DNA was probably not kind to Jamie because he was smaller in stature. But I think Jamie kept it together. He would have been as big, if not bigger than his dad, as far as size and prowess. You can't overrate superstar Billy Dundee because he was one of the brightest stars ever. But I think Jamie was on that path. And then for whatever reason, I think when he and Wolfie teamed together, that was probably the highlight of his career with PG-13. But after that, he fell on some difficult times. And quite frankly, the last time I saw Jamie, he was not in good shape.
I think he, in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, he's had one wrestling appearance wrestling, and they said he got so blowed up that he thought he was having a heart attack. And then he recently was a guest on Wolfie's podcast and did a very good job. Certainly right now, and episode for another day, and I really don't think in Memphis we saw that, but there are horror stories, even though Michael does not agree with this one, and I wasn't around it, but certainly the fans have been programmed the fact, even though he wasn't a second generation wrestler, his dad was a promoter, but George Goulas gets a lot of flack, but also Greg Gagne gets a lot of flack, and there's others throughout the year. everybody we've talked about today, as we look at it, Eddie Gilbert can be proud of his career. Ken Wayne, proud of his career. Jeff Jarrett, proud of his career. Doug Gilbert, a great career as well. And I think Jamie Dundee is PG-13. Did you have any thoughts on Jamie Dundee, Pat?
You made one of our shows that PG-13 really reinvigorated much of them. So I went back and dug everything I could up. Those guys could work. They could absolutely work. They were fantastic together.
Yeah, I couldn't talk highly of him, no doubt about it. And here we go. And this is, we'll talk about this guy a couple of times on this show. Started his wrestling career about 1990. He passed away in 2018 at July the 29th, 2018, at 46 years old. Too sexy, Brian Christopher, because of everybody we talked about, even though Jerry Jarrett was a star, and Tommy Gilbert was a star, and Bill Dundee was a star. Can you imagine in Memphis, Tennessee, being the son of Jerry Lawler? That's big time, heavy shoes to fill. That's probably why, among other reasons, that they never said he was Jerry Lawler's son, but you can just look at him, no doubt about it. Even though I'll go to Pat first, I will say this, and this is where I am not taking in consideration past their age peak, or maybe I am. I'm just saying I'm conflicted because Brian Christopher, a hell of a talent. I mean, unbelievable talent. I think he was a hell of a talker. And I think personality-wise and talking-wise, I would give him the nod over Brian. And I think over Jeff Jarrett, I really would. Jeff, though, career as an active wrestler has lasted longer, so that's in the column for Jeff. But this Brian Christopher, if territories would have gone on, would have been absolutely, without a doubt, the next Jerry Lawler. And I don't think Jeff Jarrett would have been the next Jerry Lawler, not in Memphis, Tennessee. Quick thoughts on Brian Christopher, Pat?
Frog, I agree with you about Brian. In my view, and wrestling is full of tragedies. Okay, it just is. In my view, probably Brian's death, and his spiral downward. Let's put it that way. That led to that is probably one of the more tragic stories in my mind in wrestling, and it's just a shame because that guy had it all. I think Jeff did a lot. Jeff's smaller too. Jeff did a lot with everything he had, but Brian Christopher had it all, man.
Absolutely. Real quick, as we want to get through this thing, Michael, thoughts on Brian Christopher?
Tragic. The first thing that comes to mind. Tragic. What happened? I always felt, and Jerry was very protective, and I worked when Brian was developing, and Jerry was very protective to try to keep it kayfabe that he was not Brian's dad, that Brian would make his career on his own terms and on his own talent. And I'm conflicted when I talk about this.
I am too.
because I feel like had Jerry given Brian, had Jerry, if an angle would have been shot and it was, Brian got attacked, Jerry was not in Brian's corner, but all of a sudden he came from the back, he saves Brian, boom, 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 boom. And then in a very passionate moment on TV would say, this is my blood. This is my son. Nobody's going to do this to my son. I think people would have accepted that and popped. And I think Brian and Christopher would have been made like that. I really do. But I understand where Jerry's coming from. I mean, I totally get it. But I just think that perhaps that Brian's star could have been much bigger and much brighter, much earlier, had Dad just allowed him to be Brian Lawler.
And let's be honest here about the whole thing. Lawler is the top baby face in the country. And I think he's wrong on this. I really do, because I think the people knew anyway. The people that came to Memphis on Monday night remember Brian coming, but Lawler didn't want the number one reason was not that he wanted Brian to make a name for his own or whatever, or the Lawler name would hurt him or whatever. That wasn't it. Lawler, as top babyface, did not want the general audience, the mass audience, to know that Lawler was old enough to have a 22-year-old kid. That is the bottom line, and that's the reason. Nothing else. And that's it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
That's it.
Well, but getting back to Brian and Brian Christopher as a talent, as a person, he was hilarious to be. People mention his laugh all the time. You should have been in the dressing room when he was cutting up or ribbing and laughing. And I mean, he was just a jovial person. He had such a great spirit to him. That's why when he died in the circumstances and the way he did, that was as big a shock to me as anything. Now, I knew that he had his demons and had fought some hard stuff and all that stuff and what had happened in the WWE and all that. We knew that story. But I just did not think Brian would come to that end. And that just, to me, I still think, and I still think sometimes of Jerry Lawler, of Jerry, what he said to me when I walked up in line at the wake for Brian. Coco Ware was there. Dave Brown was there. Our referee was there. Jerry Jarrett was there in support. I mean, there was just tons of people that were there. And Jerry looked at me and he did a double take. He said, I can't believe you came. He said, I really appreciate this. And I looked and I said, well, I had to be here because I knew this was something that was very, very close to you. And we all loved Brian. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, Michael, we're not supposed to bury our kids.
Yeah.
And I will live with that till the day I die.
And we will certainly, this part, we're talking about second generation wrestler, and we will talk about the saddest moments. So we'll get back to this subject about Brian in just a few minutes. The next person, man, any TV station, entertainment station, any kind of thing you turn on, you hear this guy. He started in the USWA in 1996. He's the son of Rocky Johnson. He is Flex Cavana, better known as The Rock, or certainly known for his movies as Dwayne Johnson, his real name. And Flex Cavana is currently 50 years old. I don't think that we have to talk too much about, I don't think we have to give a biography or an autobiography or tell the people what he's done in this business and in business other than we talked earlier of show he co-produces, Tales from the Territory, that we're trying to do our best to get off on. So what can you say, Pat, that's not already out there about Dwayne Johnson?
Well, one thing I wanted to say earlier, it crossed my mind, and you're right. There's not much more to say, but I am thankful that Dwayne is producing this, and I'm showing it the respect that it deserves around all the territories. And that's
yes, sir.
I'm a historian at heart, and he's telling a very important history the right way. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate him for it.
Now, if memory serves me correct, and I could be wrong because I'm getting older myself, Michael St. John, I believe, when the month or so that Flex Cavana, aka Dwayne Johnson, was in the Memphis territory, I don't remember you being around too much during that time period. Were you?
Actually, I was, and I was subbing in because that was about the same time period of when Lance had his heart attack, and then and I get these one event with the other turned around, and then Dave's daughter was tragically killed, and I was coming in. I was in St. Louis at the time, and was coming in either flying down or driving down to do the shows when one was missing. And actually, I don't know if I did the first match with Flex Cavana. I know that I did a match with Dave Brown. In fact, I've got it in archives somewhere of introducing him as Rocky Johnson Jr. But he was incredible talent. My question is, who in the heck gave him the name Flex Cavana? That sounds like something you rent an umbrella from on a beach.
Vince McMahon. He
Did Vince give him
insisted.
that name?
He insisted. I argued with Jim Ross about it because when he told me, he called me and he said, Rocky's Johnson's son's wrestling now, and we want to send him to you. I said, that's great. Said, get some heat on him and bring his dad in and draw some money. He said, oh no. Said, you can't do that. I said, why can't I not do that? And he said, because Vince doesn't want to refer him. Said, this guy will. Vince thinks will be the biggest star in the history of the business, which he was eventually, but not as Flex Cavana. And that's exactly what Vince wanted to do. It was 100% Vince McMahon call, 100% Vince McMahon call. And when Dave's daughter was killed, that was after Dave had left the USWA, so it would have been before that, because Dave's daughter was killed by a drunk driver in '97, in between USWA going out of business and Power Pro starting. Rocky, Dwayne Johnson, what were you doing in your life around probably April, maybe a little later than that, of 1996? Because he was on the very last Mid-South Coliseum card as Flex Cavana. His first TV match certainly was with Brian Christopher as his partner against Lawler and Dundee. That was his first TV match. His first Mid-South Coliseum match was with Tony Falk.
I came back to St. Louis from Los Angeles to run the Zimmer properties in St. Louis and Q104 in April of '95, and the family was still living in Los Angeles, and then I got in contact. I guess either Jerry Lawler came to St. Louis. In fact, came to our house. Took him to a Cardinal game. He threw out the first ball at a Cardinal game that because we had some connections to the radio stations and. With the Cardinal baseball, and he really had a great time. We went to dinner that night, and he was Jerry's a great athlete, but a great sports fan in his life too. But so after he did that, or right before he did that, I was already coming down on occasion to Memphis to shoot the show, and it became more. It became more of a thing in '96, and then even more in '97 and '98 after I bought the station down here. But I can remember Rocky, or the Rock, Dwayne, being in the back at Memphis TV. And one of the things I know we talk about, I'd always ask about his dad, but one of the things I can remember when I in '76. In '77, when I was programming in Memphis and did the first shows before the Lance and Dave got brought over, and I did those shows from the Cook Convention Center for about 4 weeks. Rocky was involved in a feud with Jerry Lawler, and Dwayne. They didn't call him Dwayne; they called him Dewey. Would be in the locker room, and he was just a little kid, probably 10, 12 years old, and he'd sit on the bench or in the chair, and I'd talk to him. He was a very shy young man, but a very yes sir, no sir. You could tell. And of course, his dad was there, but you can say what you want, but Rocky Johnson will probably be, the Rock, Dwayne Johnson will probably be the biggest star to come out of professional wrestling across the board internationally ever. I agree.
Ever, no doubt about it. Then we want to talk about the last guy from a great wrestling family, and we are talking about second generation wrestlers. And then our final, I'm going to give you one now, and then the last one we'll give is somebody that currently is a second generation wrestler, and we've tried to get on the show tonight. He did I guess he's a big shot now that he won the NWA World Junior Championship. He's a big shot, and he didn't return my message, but anyway, we'll get to him in a minute. I want to talk about the legacy that Bob Armstrong, Bullet Bob, that always said Southern born, Southern bred. When he dies, he'll be Southern dead. We want to talk about Bob Armstrong and his sons, and we'll talk about the one that was in the Memphis territory the longest, and that is the Road Dog. And in Memphis, we called him Brian James Armstrong, and he is a generational talent as well. Also, certainly that Brad, Steve, and Scott, and I've left somebody out, so I'm going to do a double here before we get to our final thing. Then we'll get double comments from Pat and Michael about not only Brian Armstrong from the lineage of Bob Armstrong, Brian Armstrong, and the Road Dog, but we also have to talk about the Fullers. And I left the Fullers off this list, and Chris Ellis sent me a text and said, you didn't mention the Fullers. So if we can go to the picture of a very young Robert Fuller, a very young Ron Fuller, and their father that Michael mentioned earlier, Buddy Fuller. Ron Fuller is currently 74 years old. Robert Fuller is 73, and a part of the Welch family is 72-year-old Jimmy Golden. So we'll start with certainly Jimmy, 72 years old, and was in Memphis for several runs, had a program with Lawler. He was a great worker, great talent, wrestled for Southeastern and Continental. There's a look how young Robert Fuller is in that picture. We'll start with you, Pat, real quick again, but comments about Brian Armstrong and then talk about the Fullers, then talk about Jimmy Gold. Quickly.
Well, I mean, Brian has carved out a unique career for himself in the wrestling business, and he and Jeff have given me a lot of joy. About the Armstrongs. I don't know, and Randy, maybe I don't know when Robert's debut was, but I know that in the late '60s to early '70s. He was one of the first babyface teams. He and Jimmy Golden that I ever saw, and they were they were in the Google's territory, and they were the babyface team on young babyfaces wrestling in Birmingham.
I would guess that would be
They did the
1972.
car angle where the car gets wrecked. Okay, well, it was right. It was probably within 6 months of that.
Real quick, the Fullers.
Well, I mean, that's
Any
what
more
I was
about the
saying about.
Fullers? Okay.
Well, I said about Robert and Jimmy Golden, and I didn't see Ron until later. But Robert was real active in the Birmingham end for a good period of time when I was a kid.
Michael, we'll let you start with the Fullers and Jimmy Golden, and then Brian Armstrong.
Oh, I echo what Pat said. Robert cut his teeth in Nick's territory originally, and they paired him up with Jimmy Golden, and he worked this side of the territory, meaning he'd work Birmingham, Huntsville, Chattanooga, this area. And part of that was the fact Jimmy Golden was young and grew up in Montgomery and was living in Montgomery, and Memphis or Birmingham was midway between Nashville and Montgomery. So it was great that they'd be there on Saturday for live studio wrestling and then be back at the Boutwell Auditorium, the City Auditorium on Monday night. Ron Fuller was, again, I agree with what Pat said. Ron was sort of hidden from us. I don't know if he was working the Knoxville end at that point or was working the Louisville, Memphis end at that point, but we didn't see Robert or Ron until we had seen Robert probably 3 or 4 years. And then I think they paired up the two brothers and they did a little run in this area.
Ron, when he opened up in the end of 74, Southeastern, then he had to build up the territory and wasn't running every night. He had a run in 75 in Memphis. He did Memphis every week for several months and was the Southern champion, or ended up winning a tournament, ended up losing the title to the Mongolian Stomper in 75. That's where he saw the Mongolian Stomper for the first time, and he stole him for the Fuller for his territory. Not stole him, but he was very impressed. And Archie moved to Knoxville and never did move away. So the Fullers and Jimmy Golden and Brian Armstrong, quickly, Michael.
Well, also let's include the Welches in there, because Roy Lee Welch and the boys, the Fields brothers, and all those folks down in Pensacola and Mobile had a territory going at the same time. So it was sort of like a family affair in this whole area. The Fullers, the Welches, the Jarrett, everybody was sort of kin to each other somehow, somewhere. I remember Bob Armstrong, and I was not aware of his sons until Jesse James and and Jeff Jarrett came out west when I was in Los Angeles and saw him at the pond at Anaheim. And then we went out to dinner and went back to their hotel at Westchester over by the airport and sat until 2:00 in the morning telling wrestling stories. But I think Jesse James Armstrong, in my opinion, sort of, like Pat said, went his own way and became a big star. Scott and the other brothers, I know one of them was a referee. I'd see him on TV at the WWE things, but I was not really exposed to them as much as certainly I was to the Fullers.
The last person that I want to talk about is the current NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion. He's 22 years old. He defeated Homicide this past week for Pat's beloved NWA promotion, and there you have him with the Junior Heavyweight Championship belt. Again, I want to jump back. Al says, I always thought Brad Armstrong was a great guy in the ring, and he certainly was. Kerry Morton, a former guest on Talking Memphis Wrestling, the son of Ricky Morton. Kerry is a very nice young man, Pat, and I think he has a big future.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed when we had him on talking with him, and I'm bemoaning what once was my beloved NWA. I think that's reaching the end of the road. When you make Tyrus the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, it's just they've jumped the shark.
If I can get through what I want to get through, we'll throw in comments about the fiasco that's the NWA now, the apparently real public breakup between Nick Aldis and Billy Corrigan, the president and owner of the NWA. But we won't get to that right now. We just want a few words from Michael St. John as we talk Memphis wrestling. It is, let's see, right now it's 8:24. So I'm going to try to get out of here at 5 minutes to 9 Central Standard Time, but it gives me a chance to do my next subject we want to talk about. I don't know if we want to talk about it, but we will, the sad moments in wrestling. But right now, I want Michael St. John to quickly discuss Kerry Morton and the future you see him having.
Well, if he keeps developing the way he has, and knowing his dad, and knowing how much that he has put in time and effort wise, and now is seconding him in matches, you're seeing both of them together a lot. I think there's only big things to come, and I think the World Junior Heavyweight Championship in a what has become an independent company is just a small step of where this young man can go. I think he needs to grow into his frame a little bit more. That's the other thing. I know he's doing the gym thing and is working and but his dad, Ricky Morton, was always a small Bill Dundee stature, Jamie Dundee stature kind of wrestler growing up. And look how big he got, and is one of the biggest international attractions still to this day with Robert Gibson. So I think the sky's the limit. If young Mr. Morton can keep his head on straight, he'll be fine. He'll be great.
Very interesting talk about second generation Memphis wrestling. Now I'm going to bring it down a little bit, and I was thinking about this subject because one of the things that happens as you get older, and Pat's in the boat, and Michael's in the boat, and I'm in the boat, and certainly it's a very sad situation as we get older, because one of the things we do, and one of the things that I did last night, guys, was that I went out and went to the visitation of a guy that I graduated high school with. And when you see people that you were friends with or went to school with, and then you know your history. He was the son of the principal of Jonesboro High School. He was a athletic award winner his senior year. He was the senior class president, and it's funny how the world kind of evolves, and because I had heard his name's Steve Brown. I heard that he had passed away just the other day, and I hadn't, to be honest with you, I hadn't seen him since graduation, May the 19th, 1980. But it's just sad that people that you grow up with, you lose. But it's funny how things go around, because I sent a message out to my niece Amy that I had a former classmate pass away, blah blah blah. Then she sent me one and said, you won't believe this. And she said Corbin, which is her son, so my great nephew, had a friend, two brothers that he was friends with from his high school, and Corbin's 27 years old, so the boys are 27. So it was it affected Corbin with his friends leaving their father. Corbin had just his friend was in from Little Rock for another friend's funeral, and so Corbin had lunch with the guy, and the guy was going to go see his dad, and he found his dad dead. It's just a sad situation. So basically, when we get to our age, guys, it is expected. We talked about this first person I'm going to talk about, one of the sad moments in pro wrestling. We talked about it last week. Of course, Michael wasn't here with us, and I'll lead off with one of the most shocking ones in the history of wrestling, with the circumstances that happened. And we'll, of course, talk about the July 17th, 1988 death of Bruiser Brody in Puerto Rico, where he was in a dressing room situation and was stabbed by Jose Gonzalez, the booker, for Christ's sakes, of Puerto Rico. Bruiser Brody, certainly, I believe, was around 40 years old. Michael, your thoughts real quick.
Worked with him, one of the toughest guys I ever met. I always thought that he was had a little edge on him, and I think the edge probably caught up with him. I've heard that story so many times. I've heard Dutch tell it. I've heard Tony Atlas tell it in person. And it's just, it amazes me that how kayfabe that whole thing ended up being. And Tony Gonzalez got the rap, but there's a lot of people that believe it wasn't Tony. So I just very sad though, very very sad.
Pat, real quick, 25 minutes left in the show.
Yeah.
20 minutes left in the show.
It was very sad. Yeah, it's very sad, and they did a Dark Side of the Ring on it, and that was really emotional for me because his wife, he left a small, just a awful, just awful.
You know what? As I did this probably pretty quickly, as I was saying, the tragedy of the Von Erichs, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't put the Von Erichs on this list, and certainly that's a big factor. I think maybe one of the saddest, shocking things, because it happened on pay-per-view, was the death in May of 1999 of Owen Hart, and that is a graphic picture, and I think we have two pictures there, Adam. But there's Jerry Lawler, that was the first person in the ring when that happened. Then he scooted out when the paramedics got it, and that was just what can you say, Pat, about that tragedy? And I believe I have one more picture, do I not? Yes. There was a film put out, The Life and Death of Owen Hart. I have not seen that at all. I remember certainly when this happened, is that Brandon Baxter came over to my house, and we watched that pay-per-view together, and that was again May the 23rd, 1999. A tragic situation that played out on live TV. The debate whether they should have continued the show, we certainly that can be debated to the end of time. But real quick, what can you say about the Owen Hart situation besides tragedy and so sad, and left two young kids?
I know he and Jeff were particularly close, personal friends, and I've heard him talk about that on a couple of occasions, and I agree with Al. It was horrible, and the wrestling business is fortunate that we haven't had more deaths in the ring. And, I think in retrospect, what they were doing was a little over the top from a risk standpoint. And it's just just a very sad thing. Again, and we've all seen the episode. He left a couple young kids. It's just an awful thing. Just, life is precious, and that's why I like that. That's why our little family here, and I mean Al and Paniti and everybody, Ahmad and everybody, I won't, everybody on here, I hope you know how much you mean to me, and Randy, you and Michael too, because you're right. Life is very much precious.
Here, and I want to ask a quick question to my producer, Adam Dunn, because I'm looking at these comments. A Facebook user who I can't see who it is says, hello, says, looking amazing. I like to know about people saying that we look amazing. So who is that? Oh, my buddy, Chris Gales from Mississippi, the great entertainer, my buddy. It says anonymous Facebook user, Chris Gales, Walking in Memphis, all the great songs. Certainly, I love him. Michael, just again, what can you say more than it's just a sad situation with Owen?
It is, and I think it was completely avoidable.
Absolutely.
This to me is one of the biggest knocks I can think of against sports entertainment. In a professional wrestling setting in the territories, that death would have never happened.
But in all reality, in 1983, Jerry Lawler entered the same way at the Mid-South Coliseum.
Oh, yeah. But I think Jerry was much better when he entered on a camel and a horse and on.
I agree. I agree. I just want it out there that that it had been done in Memphis before, one time.
Leave the circus to the circus.
I agree.
How many times have you heard that quote? Ronnie West used to say that. Leave the circus to the circus.
I 100% agree, no doubt. That was sad. And also another certainly terrible one was in 2007, the murder-suicide situation with Chris Benoit. That certainly when that came out, wrestling all around took a big hit, and maybe deservedly so, maybe not. Certainly, never met Chris Benoit, didn't know him. I know people that did and talked a lot about it. We'll start with you, Michael. Do you remember where you were when they had the show that I'm sure is the one television show that Vince McMahon regrets doing more than any he's ever done? Because Monday Night Raw came on the air with the announcement by Vince, and they did a whole memorial show. Then later on, obviously, the news that it was a murder-suicide and he committed a murder. And then everything of Chris Benoit has been taken off of WWF TVs. Is that the darkest moment in pro wrestling history, Michael?
If not, it's close. You know, I never worked with Chris. I've known some people that did, that have talked about this since that happened, subsequently, and there were signs, but you never know. And it's one of the darkest moments and one of the most profane, sorriest moments in wrestling that the WWE jumped the broom and did that show. And I'm sure that's regretted to this day. And I think the only people that ever bring that up are people that are talking heads like we are in shows like this anymore. But, you know, the Benoit thing was just criminally sad.
Pat?
I mean, inside or outside of wrestling, and we we all have demons, okay, and certainly I do, and uh, Michael, people that knew him and said there were signs there, and I mean, a lot of wrestling has a lot of misfit toys in it. I mean, this isn't, you don't go to trade school to be a wrestler. You have to have a certain mentality, and you guys know that better than I do. I mean, you're different. Wrestling people are different animals. I mean, they choose a life that's not normal, and it's just that. And Frog brought up about Miss Elizabeth. I mean, it's just tragedy multiplied and magnified.
Absolutely, very well said. And then I'm going to give Adam a heads up. I'm going to go through, before I go back to Pat and Michael, I'm going to go through several of the Memphis guys as we talk right now. And the first wrestling death I remember in my life, that was shocking, and a very nice guy, but the world didn't know he was a nice guy because that was in the time period that the wrestling world was protected in 1976. The tragic car wreck of Sam Bass, as we see from there, certainly changed Jerry Lawler's career forever. The early 90s death of the Honorable Imperial Mr. Tojo Yamamoto, very, very sad. Then the 95 death of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, as we have a picture there of the gravesite of the Gilbert family. And there you see Eddie. Then Tommy, I think, passed away. He was born in 40 and passed away, I believe I'm right, on 2015. Mama Pom, Peggy is still doing very good. That's great as well. Certainly, as I looked at this list, the The Tojo one affected me because I traveled so much with Tojo, very, very much. The Eddie Gilbert situation really bothered me, and the hardest thing about that, we got a call. I got a call on the way from Memphis TV from Buddy Wayne. Ken Wayne, his son, was booked in Puerto Rico, and so Buddy told me about the death, and I had to be the one, because back then not a lot of people had cell phones. Doug didn't have a cell phone, and so what we did is that when I heard the information Eddie Marlin got there, I had Eddie call Tommy Gilbert and tell Tommy Gilbert the news. So that was hard for Eddie. And certainly I called Tommy Rich, who was at his mother's, and I said, hey, told him what happened. I said, hey, I got to tell Doug, and I need you to come help me do that. And so that was a very hard situation, and one of the first wrestling funerals that I ever went to in my life. But certainly in his 30s, just gone way, way too young. Certainly affected me because I love Brian Christopher to death. I loved his father, and Brian Christopher's death certainly uh, sad as well. So, Pat, we're finishing up by talking about and the one other person that I would like to to say, and I'm looking at uh, the notes, is a very good friend of mine that I travel with a lot, and just a great talent. Billy Travis passed away way too young. There's no doubt about it. So on the list of Memphis people, quick thoughts, Pat, as I will give you a time here, is 8:41 at the latest. I want to be out of here by 8:55 at the very absolute latest. Your thoughts on those guys?
Well, you know, they're all tragic stories in their own way, and the thing I think that you bring to this, that for people like me who aren't have never really been involved in the business on a day to day basis, is all the people that it touches. I mean, I can't imagine sitting down and telling somebody that their brother's gone. But you know, you've had a relationship with the family for over half a century, and you know them as people, not as performers and not as wrestlers. I'm thankful you were there for for the Gilberts during that period of time. I really am.
And it's the same thing. I was managing Jerry Lawler's Hall of Fame bar and grill, and this is because it's the most recent. Was tough. Got a phone call that Brian Christopher was flown to the Memphis airport, and I was in the hospital at the Med. I stayed all night long. Waller was booked in the Carolinas, so he had to get a flight back, and so I was there at the hospital when Brian Christopher died. It's just a sad situation, and certainly not putting words into Michael St. John's mouth, but I'm going to anyway. I would think of the people that I listed on this list, and many of them, including Brian and Billy Travis. I would guess that the person that affected you the most would have been Tojo Yamamoto.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was in St. Louis. I'd been on the job at Hot 97 for about a month. And my ex called me at 8:30 in the morning and said, I got some really bad news. And of course, I thought family immediately. And when she told me, I was just stunned. And and to this day, I don't, I have not gotten over the fact that Tojo said to me on the bus coming back from Dallas in December that year, um, or it may have been November. He was into dialysis. They had to treat him with dialysis for his kidney problems. And he said, I know, like, I'd not do this. I'd rather die. And I was like, Tojo, you got a lot to live for, man. You got a lot of people that love and respect you, whatever. And tried to just give him some good moral support. He said, I shoot myself. I'm like, oh, you're not going to shoot yourself, Tojo. I'm just, it was just one of those conversations that you blow off because you don't want to think about it. And then for a couple of months later here that he did what he said he was going to do. And I know in listening to Jerry Jarrett, I did not have the opportunity to attend the funeral, unfortunately, but because of working in St. Louis and the company and the issues we were having at the station at the time. But I can remember Jerry Jarrett crying and watching the tape of the funeral, and Jerry crying about that Tojo had reached out to him, and he too didn't take Tojo's remarks of Tojo being serious, that Tojo was just letting off some emotions and some steam to get people to understand what he was. But we didn't understand what he was going through, what he really was going through, and I regret it to this day.
How about the other names starting, certainly that we mentioned here are the Memphis guys, Sam Bass, Eddie Gilbert, Brian Christopher, Billy Joe Travis, just the Memphis crew.
I mean, there's not one that doesn't bring a tear to your eye or my eye, right. For sure. The Billy Joe Travis thing was, I'd lost track of Billy Joe after USWA went away, and the next thing I heard, he had passed, and that I always enjoyed. Billy had one of those little quirks about him that when he'd come in the dressing room, he would it could be the shittiest of crowds and the worst of the worst going on around you, and he had a way of being happy and getting you pumped up and getting you in a better mood, just by his aura, by his personality. He was, and I know Billy had situations he was fighting in demons, as Pat related to earlier. But Billy was one of those guys that whenever I was around him, he just made you laugh. He just made you happy. He just made you feel better about everything. And so when I heard we'd lost him, it hit pretty hard.
Yeah, just a sad situation. So as we wrap up the show today, I want to bring in the producer of the show real quick, Adam Dunn, because it's been a while since we've had Adam Dunn pop in on us. As for the first time in a long time, we had almost a full crew. Chris wasn't here today. Just Adam. We've talked about a lot of stuff today. Certainly, we certainly had you in close to the opening. We talked about second generation wrestlers, and then we talked about the saddest moments and anything else we talked about. Just overall comments on the show today, and any comments that you would like to say about anything we did talk about today.
Well, yeah, just talking about the ones that passed away. Just unfortunately, even though as young as I am, a lot of those guys have passed away in my lifetime. But I'm just grateful that I got to see some of them. Of course, the closest to me, and one of the saddest ones for me would have been Brian. But just being a fan of Billy Travis and guys like that, the Eddie and Tojo and stuff, I was still pretty young when those happened. But always sad, especially when it's somebody like they were saying earlier, just kind of, you, Randy, of course, knew all of them as more than just the wrestlers that people like me and Pat watched on TV. And with Billy seeing his Hall of Fame picture, of course, mentioned earlier about Eddie being in the Hall of Fame. And, I don't know anyone that had probably a closer relationship with Eddie than you. And so just all that, I think tonight was just a really good show. There were some sad topics there, but I think we covered them in a way that did them justice.
One of my goals is to tell stories that hadn't been told. My goal also is to give perspective and I think that's the key to this panel. And one of the two of the things, people that come to your mind when you talk about the deaths of Memphis wrestling, and I will tell you, that list was made to be a shocking deaths and young deaths and sad deaths. So even though we did talk about Eddie Marlin earlier, and Eddie passed away at 89 years old, and Lance Russell was in his 90s, and you expect people to in their late 80s and early 90s to pass away. People like Tojo and people like Eddie Gilbert and Owen Hart. Is just a sad situation. We'll let Pat give his comments because I'm thinking. Well, no, let me ask Adam a question real quick. I think I did ask it maybe. Real quick, Adam, what was your thoughts on the show today?
Oh, just like I say, the show overall, I think it was fantastic. And wish we had Chris here with us, so we had the entire crew. But of course, having Michael back on after all this football and everything that's going on, we've had some of the same stuff going on at the stations here, so I know how stressful that is. And Michael puts a lot of effort into the football games with the coaches' interviews, and Michael actually broadcasts a lot of the games himself. So I'm sure he's probably happy that we're getting toward the other side of that and then getting out of the politics and stuff too. But of course, we're going to have ads keeping coming here for the Herker thing, so that's a good thing revenue wise. But of course, stress wise and everything, it's nice to kind of start getting toward the other end of that. But next week's going to be super busy for us because we got to get all the logs and everything done for Thanksgiving week. So you kind of go from one issue to another. But great show today. Really enjoyed it as always. Tuesday nights, it's really neat to get all of you guys' perspective on everything. I think everybody really enjoys that.
Thanks for producing. You do a great job. Show is looking good. It looks like $1 million. Thanks to you, Pat Trammell. How did you like the show today? Even though we had some sad subjects, but I think important subjects. And final thoughts, as of course we have one more show before Thanksgiving.
Well, it was a different tone today, a different show, a lot more emotional for me. Just thinking about all these people who have gone before. But it just tells me how thankful I am for everybody on here, and I mean, and it starts with Adam. I don't think Adam gets near the credit we. If everybody who joins us as our friends every week knew how much effort he puts in, and not to diminish you, who is the reason we're all here, and we certainly
Yeah, I
appreciate
don't do
that.
much. I just write the show and create the show and and load the show. Oh, I don't do much, Pat.
Oh, I know that,
I
but
love Adam.
anyway,
There's no doubt
yeah,
about it. But Adam knew that was coming.
yeah.
Michael, how'd you like the show today? And final thoughts is then I'll go into my plugs and get us out of here so I can watch Portland wrestling.
Well, Kentucky just got beat by Mississippi State, or excuse me, Michigan State in basketball in a game I thought would never end because I had the TV on wanting to see what the college football rankings are. But great show. I really enjoy it. I enjoy it every time I'm on here. I don't consider good show by a bad show. I just consider it we get a lot of time to talk amongst ourselves and talk about a subject that we all love and are invested in emotionally as well as mentally, and that's professional wrestling. And anytime you can do that on any platform, I think is a wonderful thing. And thank God we live in a country where we at least have free elections. And I understand what Adam is saying about those political ads over in Georgia, because some of them play on my network, on iTunes and on Live 365, which our radio station's a platform on, and they do inserts, and some of those are for either Warnock or for Herschel Walker. Do you mind if I mention a show that I've been invited to be a guest on tomorrow, Randy?
Of course.
It's a show I've never heard of before, but a good friend of mine's a state trooper here in town and in this area, and he was aware of it. And then one of the guys is a friend of him. And when he found out that I was a friend of Chuck's, he said, we got to have him on the show. So I've sort of waited to what I thought football season would be over with. Arabs on their biggest run ever, 11-win season. We're now in the third round of the state playoffs playing at Pleasant Grove Friday, and we never thought we'd be here in the 25 years I've been here. But it's called the Percy and Faced podcast. It's part of the Anchor network by Spotify. So I have no idea what that means, but they just want to talk to Michael St. John about his wrestling career. And I want to thank you, Randy, for giving me the opportunity to keep my mind and my soul and my heart active in professional wrestling. I just think it's one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest sports, and I called it that. We'll continue to call it that. Alive, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people to really enjoy something that we're one of the few countries that we're allowed to enjoy this kind of freedom and talk about it. So I love it. And thank you, Randy, for letting me be a part of it. And Pat, I still got that bottle of Ale 8 here waiting on you. And I almost called you today. Had I had time, I had at the last minute to go to Tuscaloosa Academy to interview their coach for they're playing Fife this week and get him interviewed. And otherwise, if I had time in Birmingham, we'd have met over at Nikki's West and grabbed some grub. But I promise you, hopefully next week I'll be coming back down that direction if AREP can get the win this week.
Good deal. Look forward to it.
I appreciate it. Y'all go get drunk together or whatever. Backel doesn't even drink, and he's offering drinking. I don't understand that. But real quick, the plugs tomorrow
Coca-Cola.
morning. All right, tomorrow morning at 9:00 Central Standard Time, it's Front Row with Bud Row. Man alive, looking forward to that. And I was so happy that I hosted the show last week. My nephew Cal and two of his teammates to talk some football. Cal and Carson and Hayden were on the show last week. We might even have that picture. I don't know if I have it up there or not. We do. That's Carson, and then Cal, then me, and then Hayden. And they won this past Friday night. And so I tell them that doing that radio interview with me gave them the win. And it's the first time they had won a first round playoff game. They played Friday night. So Front Row with Bud Row. I'll be on the Power Hour at 9:00 next Monday. I believe it's the January the 16th show, number 40 of Power Pro Wrestling. We'll be back here next Tuesday. Everybody, it's getting cold. I've already scraped bites off my windows twice, and we've had some snow, and it is cold. I appreciate Adam Dunn, Pat Trammell, and Michael St. John, and I'm Randy Hales. And guess what, folks? I'm out. Bye-bye.
Talking Memphis Wrestling with Randy Hales, featuring Michael St. John, Pat Trammell, and special guests.